Hello and welcome back to El Partido, yet another Spanish football podcast. But as always, we like to take a different view on Spanish football, and it tends to be a nostalgic one, a historic one that lets us live in the good old days when football wasn't all about XG and who's in your next ultimate team pack. We're not in that age, are we, Paul? Lovely to see you again.
Lovely to see you too, Nick. I'm really enjoying this. We're finding a bit of a rhythm with this now, and it's been good few episodes, and we've covered a range of things, and what we've got to discuss on this one is thoroughly exciting, and I hope everybody's going to be enjoying it as much as you and I are going to be when it comes to talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just reveling in this, reliving versions of Spanish football, and you know what, football just in general. There was obviously the huge Barclaysman movement a few months ago. With another podcast, which I definitely I recommend listen to. But it's just that idea we can get to think about all this again and enjoy it all again, and get to mock anyone who thinks that we're daft for wanting, to admire Fernando Morientes or think about, JJ Okocha's time at Bolton. It's just a great time to have been watching football. But as you said, we've got a really interesting topic to discuss tonight. We're starting our first series, which means, as I said to Liam the other night, we're getting serious on this podcast. It's a really exciting one, isn't it, Paul? We've spoke about this a couple of times. It's got quite a wide range, and it's sleeping giants. And there are a few sleeping giants in Spanish football we'd like to talk about, aren't there?
Absolutely, yeah. There's been, we've narrowed it down for this first episode to a region, and we've chosen a super club in that region. And there's lots of places that this series could take us, but I think this is an excellent starting point.
Yeah, I think for me, when we talk about sleeping giants in Spanish football, there are a lot of teams that do stand out, but there is just one team which is seemingly head and shoulders above the rest for me in terms of where they were to where they got to and to where they are now. The journey they've been on, and you've alluded to it already with the super element to it. And we are going to, of course, going to be talking about Super Depor today, Deportivo La Coruña, the team from Galicia, and how, they spent almost 2 decades out of the top flight before the 1990s, got themselves in there and just had this glorious age at the top table, and an ultimate fall down as well, and one of the biggest collapses you'll see in a football club ever, potentially, Paul.
Yeah, Nick. So one of the biggest drop-offs you can imagine, which we're going to get into. Very sad, because it's also a very, very picturesque part of the world as well. So looking forward to exploring it.
Yeah, definitely, because when we talk about teams from Galicia, especially during the 90s, we do have quite a fond image of them, but it wasn't always that way, and I'll caveat this by saying this isn't my or your attitude towards Galicia. I can't say I've ever actually been, but I know it's a stunning part of the world. But at a certain point in time, sort of like, in the 70s and 80s, it was seen as a bit of a, for want of a better word, a backwater, probably not too dissimilar to the way that people thought about parts of Lancashire, parts of Yorkshire, if you're from the UK, or, some parts of Scotland, for example, maybe, or Wales. And it wasn't the go-to place, especially if you were a footballer looking to build a career in Spain. It didn't have the glamour of going to Barcelona. It didn't have the excitement of moving to Madrid. So it kind of became like a bit of a struggle to attract people to. In the same vein with the economic struggles that they had in Galicia, it was also hard to keep hold of people, not just football players, but people in industry and things like that. So it became a bit of a dour place. up until the 90s, when football really took Galicia to its own level, and the growth that came not just with the football but with the infrastructure and the support economically, it was a really exciting time. And the emergence of Super Depor at this point was really, really, really interesting to see, especially with that promotion to La Liga that sort of like kicked it all off, didn't it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Super Depor. A lot, everything that came with it. It was like the fanfare that just seemed to surround it. There was a new energy that gets associated with it, and certainly, and I don't know as well. Maybe there's an element where that's sort of being enhanced with the nostalgic lens that we perhaps put on things. But it's when I look back, I do think there was a buzz that came with this entire era really that spanned 15 or so years. You'd probably say early 92, 93 to mid 2000s, I guess. And just to caveat the point that you said before about the backwater and the references to certain parts of Northern England, we are qualified to say that as Northerners ourselves, aren't we? There's no
Yes.
offense intended to anyone. We have lived experience and are qualified to make that assertion, though we do not condone it and reserve the right to be offended ourselves.
Yes, exactly. We if anything, we have an affinity with our Celtic cousins in Galicia as well. Certainly in parts of Lancashire where we're from, and I'm sure people of Scottish, Irish, and Welsh descent and Cornish descent will also agree very much so with us. I think a big thing for this, in terms of not just with Super Depor as well at this point, but the emergence of the other Galician sides too. We're definitely going to do a Eurocelta episode one day. I know we mentioned it with Miguel Pereira last week, but even Sociedad Deportiva Compostela, they had 4 seasons, I think it was, in the 90s in the Liga, and they're a team that are now based down in the Segunda Federación. And they were up there, so it was a really great time to be a footballer in Galicia. It was a great time to watch football in Galicia, and it just really, really grew from there. But we are going to talk about Super Depor with this part, and I suppose only one place we can start.
Like you said there, though, this is a region where there's a lot of stories we could. I mean, Compostela themselves, the story of that club, the modern incarnation is essentially a Phoenix club as well, and we're very much looking forward to getting into Eurocelta at some point. This is a part of the world that there's been a certain snobbery towards, I think, but the story of Super Depor almost defies that snobbery, and I think, as we'll get into, there's elements of the events and there was a certain charisma, I think, to this period for Depor, but also for the region, that won a few new fans, won a few people over straight away, and a few players as well who were unexpectedly attracted. One who stayed longer than the other, but so let's get into it.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to start this story off as every story should start off. I'll paint you a picture. It is early 1991-92. We're on Copacabana Beach. Are you with me here? In Rio de Janeiro. There is a knock at the door. The door is answered by one Denise de Oliveira. She is the wife of Vasco da Gama's superstar Bebeto. Now, Bebeto at the time was very much in demand, very much in sort of like a love-hate rivalry with Romario, who would eventually sign for Barcelona. And Bebeto was on the verge of signing for Borussia Dortmund. Again, coming into another era for great football. Speaking of Borussia Dortmund's 90s, also excellent. The knock on the door was from Depor officials, and this is just a fantastic story that they basically rocked up in Rio to convince Bebeto that actually a move to Depor was more in his interests. But I'm sure, as you can agree with me, if there is one way to convince a husband, that something is right for him is to convince the wife. And that's not me stereotyping, that is just a rule of thumb. And it was actually the conversation they had with his wife that convinced him that Depor would be a better move for him than Borussia Dortmund, even though they were sort of the lesser known team at the time, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. The wife is the key, as is not the first or ever only time in the history of any footballer's life.
No, definitely, and I love the way that it was sold. That if you was to move to Germany, it's going to be cold. There's going to be snowy. Whereas in Spain, we have a warmer climate. The football stadium, the Riazor, is on the beach, so it could be just like you're at the Copacabana every single match day. It'd be like being at home in Brazil. They didn't decide to tune out the part where actually Galicia is a bit wet and wild as well as beautifully sunny at times as well. So, they kind of got a bit away around that. But ultimately, Depor went out and bought one of the finest strikers in world football, which really was the spark to getting this Super Depor underway.
Yeah, his arrival kick-started or marked the beginning of a transformative period for the club. It became a linchpin, formidable, a talisman, basically a talisman. First season. It's quite incredible. The way that it was marketed was just fantastic, really. To him, and obviously hearing it back there from you as well. And seeing those stunning pictures of Riazor on a good day, it is an attractive sight. But to kick on from what you said there about one of the best forwards in world football of the time, this is a guy who comes in with an instant impact. 29 goals in 37 league games in his first season, wins the Pichichi. Powered a Depor side who, as you've covered, just back in the Primera, to third in the table, which is, remarkable at the best of times.
Yeah, and I think that's it. And when we're talking about this era of football, and this is maybe where Barcelona are beginning to turn into maybe that transition phase, and there's an opportunity, but we're not too far away from the Madrid side from asserting some dominance as well. There was a gap in the market for them, really, for a new side of to attract new players and really quite exotic superstars as well. I think I don't know if it was around this time or maybe a bit further into the 90s, but Depor were actually the first Spanish side to field an 11 of no Spanish players, which again, when we look at Galicia, being somewhere that is, proudly produces a lot of decent footballers from the area, for them to have a full 11 of non-Spanish players is quite a remarkable feat.
Yeah, that was that 1996. I've got it in my head that happened when they fielded that 11. I think it's a quiz question answer that you might need to retain for a future point in time what year it was. But it's the start, as you say, Barcelona, for context. So they win the Champions League or the European Cup 1992 at Wembley, don't they? But they've got this star-studded team that's part of it. 1994, 1994. So the second season, is it? Or yeah, but the second season with Bebeto at Depor. Obviously, it goes down to the final day. For those that don't know, it went down to the final day, and Depor lose out on the league title to Barcelona, the Barcelona dream team. But it's important, as you say, to point out that Barcelona being Barcelona, there was a gap between them and Madrid, because if you're a great player, you could go to Barcelona, but you're not necessarily going to get into the dream team unless something happens to a member of the dream team, So to be sold on going to a challenger, where you could still have the climate, if, like I say, on a beautiful postcard of Riathor on a good day, would be enough to sell it to people, and it definitely allowed. And obviously, people will say straight away that there's a money element to it, but yes, there was. But this was also a different era to football. It wasn't quite. I don't. Maybe again, this could be the nostalgia bias that we have, but I don't feel like this was a period where the mercenary side of it was in full flow. I think there was still, because football was still new to the digital television side of it, or not even into the fully fledged subscription television era. That there wasn't quite the money grabbing side to it as such. I think there was still an air of romance to it, and you know, everything that comes with it, which, like to get a player, for example, like Bebeto, you do need to get his wife to bend his ear.
Yeah, you've got to go knocking on doors to get them, and I think, like you say, he's so well revered in Depor history, down as one of the best that they've ever had. And the fact that he was so formidable, 86 goals in 131 games in the blue and white, and also helping deliver their first silverware as well. And again, when we think about this, how long Deportivo de La Coruña have been in existence, the fact that it took them to 1995 to win their first Copa del Rey is just incredible to think, isn't it? And again, like we keep saying, this is maybe the nostalgia thing. We look for these nuances with how things are done, and the fact that this was a Copa del Rey final played over 2 games at the Santiago Bernabeu. It got to about 70 minutes and the heavens opened. I imagine that the Galicians were quite happy to see it, and we were like, play on, we're fine. And then 2 days later, the match is finally finished, and Depor get that winning goal, not scored by Bebeto, but he helps them win their first Copa del Rey ever. And this is kind of like the first marker that this actually is a bit of a golden era for Depor, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's because this is now a period that there's a dip partway through this, but for the next sort of 8 to 10 years, Depor are right up there. Some would say punching above their weight, but they had a charisma about them, and I'm sure we'll get onto the manager later on, but that was a huge part of it as well. In 95, 96 was so the season just after the Copa del Rey. It's John Toshak, isn't it? That's at the helm there. Yeah. And again, we're just to focus on Bebeto. 32 goals in all competitions, 25 of which were in the league, so not quite as good as his first season. But back then, you would take you'd definitely take 32 goals across all competitions and 25 in the league, wouldn't you? They follow up the Copa del Rey win with a Super Copa. Clinching that and reach the UEFA Cup Winners' Cup semi-finals, which I can't actually remember what year that tournament ceased to exist, but it was, for those that don't know, it was still a valid tournament, and one that certain clubs still held or still do hold in high regard, and had. I think it had I'd be quite tempted to bring that back, but I digress. After that season, though, Bebeto does in 1986, he does return to. I think he goes back to, is it Flamengo? He returns to
Flamengo, yeah.
But he's still already. I mean, he's cemented himself as a legend, and he's as one player leaves of that stature, another one turns up who. If you think that the name Bebeto is huge, wait until you hear the next one.
Yeah, definitely. I think the fact that you've got to fill the void that Bebeto is leaving, and it is a mini era transition for Depor, because they've got to think, right, well, how do we top what we're doing? How do we take the next step? And that comes in the form of signing a young Brazilian by the name of Rivaldo, who you might know, Paul. He had a pretty decent career in the end, but again, going back to the story of unusual transfers, in the same vein, the way that Bebeto was coaxed from signing for Borussia Dortmund, that Rivaldo had actually been announced by Parma at the time, just before the Olympics that year, that we're going to be signing Rivaldo from Palmeiras, I think it was, along with his with his colleague. I think it was I can never quite remember his name. Amyala or something like that. It was called. And they were all excited about it. They were like, ready to print Rivaldo shirts and give him the number. And then after the Olympics, he basically, his wage demands went something mental, like they tripled in value or something. And the Italians balked and they went, well, we're not going to do that. We'll just sign the one lad, please. So, as you said, as one door closes with Bebeto, the door opened for Depor to go in there and grab, one of the world's best players, or certainly one of the world's biggest talents, for a club record fee as well. So again, we're talking about, this is where Moneyball starts to come into it a little bit, because 10.6 million dollars it cost him for a massive move to get him to La Coruña, and where he could have gone anywhere in Europe, really.
Yeah, and let's put it in a wider context as well. This is when the Italian league was still one of the, if not the most glamorous in Europe, I'd say, over the Premier League. We're talking Football Italia sort of heyday, mid 90s, where the Italian clubs had a lot of money to spend, and as people will know, they all spent it pretty well to begin with, and then got a bit over enthusiastic about the spending as things moved towards the millennium. So for a club like Depor to attract a player who, as you said, there was there certainly was circumstances that enabled this to happen, but to be able to get in there and get a talent like that and bring him to Spain rather than allowing him to go to another Italian side, because even though it was too much for Parma, there were others interested, and I think that in itself is a coup, because of the teams in Italy certainly had deeper pockets than the teams in Spain. And yes, Depor had deep pockets, but contextually, this was a different era. So,
yeah, definitely. And I think that was a Parma side, if I remember rightly, where obviously Buffon had started out of. Obviously, they didn't spend too much on him, but I'm pretty sure they had Hernan Crespo at this time as well. And a few other pretty well-known footballers as Parma were a force in Italian football too. So for them to kind of balk it, he's asking for a lot of money, but Depor sort of like, so well, we need to replace one idol with another great talent. He also got the recommendations to go to Depor by other Brazilians in the squad, including Bebeto, who said it's a great place to go to. You'll really enjoy your football there. And I think one of the biggest appeals about Depor at the time, and you could probably say the same about Valencia a couple of years later, is that when you move to Spain, if you move straight to the two big boys, and that's what we're referring to, Real Madrid or Barcelona, it comes with immediate pressure, doesn't it? Pressure to succeed, pressure to be successful, and pressure to be an icon. And I imagine what it did for Rivaldo in terms of his, this is his first move to Europe, is took the pressure off him a little bit, allowed him to play the way he wanted to play, to express himself and to not be in the spotlight as much. And considering he only spent one season there, it really paid dividends for Depor as well, because he was fantastic this season.
Yeah, it was only like one season, as you say, but what a season it was. Kick starts with 5 goals in 5 games. It's an instant impact, eye-catching. 21 goals in 41 games as the season finished. Was he third or fourth highest scorer, which meant that another club did come calling, which can't be unexpected, I suppose, really.
No, definitely, and there's always going to be those iconic pictures of him wearing the Depor Adidas shirt with Foreco as the sponsor, and that's for any shirt collector, that is the one that you want as far as a Depor shirt is concerned. It's absolutely stunning with the low collar as well. So yeah, I've got my eye out for that one somewhere. But you're right, he did, like I say, only stay one season. Sometimes the lure of those big boys, as we said, is too much to turn down. I did laugh at this because obviously this is a time before the Euro, so the Spaniards are still dealing with pesetas, and I was a bit too young to really grasp currency at this age. But the fact that you moved for 4 billion pesetas is quite the price tag, really. I think we should definitely be quoting that a lot more often. But just to soften that figure, it was about $26 million. Which again for the time is massive money. It's back pocket change nowadays for a player of this quality. But back then, this was a huge move, wasn't it? I can't quite remember if it was a world record move though.
Was it? It was briefly. I think was they not later on that season? Was they not that summer? Was they not a Madrid signing that eclipsed it?
I think something like that. I want to say Christian Vieri as well at one point became the world's top signing, but this was, like you say, when the teams were just literally outbidding each other by a couple of million to take that title, weren't they? But, it does feel like it be a big one.
Yeah, there was still a period where it was almost like a bragging thing to have the most expensive player, which I think, to be fair, that sort of carried on into the mid 2000s. Actually, that sort of we can afford to pay. We're a big club. We hold the world record. Whereas now it's kind of like there's a different sense of feeling about it. Usually, if you buy a player for £100 million or something, or a world record fee, everyone expects so much from him and laughs when it doesn't work out for him, and laughs at the club really for a poor investment.
Yeah, the Florentino Perez version of 2000 compared to the Florentino Perez version of 2020 is a very different beast on this one, isn't it? But the fact I had to enjoy as well is that Bobby Robson got involved in this transfer and sort of like said to Barcelona, "We need to go and sign Rivaldo," and they were like, "Yeah, but we've got our eye on Steve McManaman." You want to sign him? And he went, no, you need to go and buy Rivaldo.
Yeah.
Which I found quite amusing.
I think we could do we could probably do a whole episode on McManaman and his time in Spain. I think there's a few interesting points in there, a few things that perhaps now we'd have a slightly different appreciation of him to back then. I know that there's certainly some of the people who maybe are a bit younger than us still think of him as that annoying or that pundit off TNT that is quite Marmite. Whereas I can remember him when he spent one of his later seasons in the blue of Manchester City, where I don't think I ever saw him touch the ball, but he was pointing, he was telling others where to play the ball, never touched the ball himself, and always came off the pitch with pristine kit, never a speck of mud on it at all. Which
he was a conductor, wasn't he?
That's
in that side. But yeah, he like you say, his time in Spain, wasn't bad either. And again, he wasn't obviously the first British player to head over there, but he was the first of this era, and the players he got to play with as well was quite interesting. So the fact that he had admirers whilst he was at Liverpool from Barcelona and Real Madrid says a lot about him. But he didn't end up at Depor, sadly, because that would have been quite fun to see. As again, Rivaldo only had this one season, you're starting to think, well, how far can Depor push their luck at the moment? They're having this golden era. They've just sold a player for the best part of 4 billion pesetas. It must start to wind down ever so slightly. But this is where the new manager comes in, and I'm sorry that I'm going to absolutely butcher this name, but Javier Ureta, I think, or Urueta, I think it was called.
Irueta, I think.
Irueta.
Irueta, yeah. See, it was Northerners. It's it's Javier Irueta.
If we caveat it as well, he is Basque as well. So we're not talking in Spanish now. We're talking Basque.
No.
from Irun as well, so as close to
Yeah.
the French border as you could possibly get in Spain. He came in to replace Jose Corral, who had had a fairly crap season, in the grand scheme of things, as far as this decade for Depor is concerned. And, he'd spent a bit of time coaching in the Basque Country. He'd been in charge of Athletic Club and Real Sociedad for brief periods. I think Santander as well. But he finished sixth with Real Oviedo, which was quite a massive feat. I think one of the last times they appeared in La Liga. Got them into UEFA Cup. The following year, he did the same thing with Depor's biggest rival, Celta Vigo, got them into the UEFA Cup, which sort of helped kickstart the Eurocelta trend. And he arrives in A Coruña to take over as manager. And this is a fairy tale story, isn't it? This is just an amazing story for Depor to take it to the next level.
Yeah, so I think it's probably fair that we get stuck into him as a manager, Irueta as a manager first, before coming on to the players. So he is somebody who, like I said, 7-year spell at the club. He brought a style and a good mix of the tactical discipline within his team, but they did play an attacking style that caught a lot of people's attention. I think it's fair to say as well that the style of play and the excitement that went with it kind of aided in the glamour that we now think back of Depor as having during this period. And I definitely think that it was that kind of ambitious football at times, but underpinned by the tactical discipline that helped win over new admirers for the club. On top of the fact that there was some astonishing footballers and some real flair within the squad. I think it's probably down to Irueta to an extent that nostalgia merchants such as ourselves have an appreciation for Super Depor and everything that goes with the club from this period.
Yeah, absolutely, and he's everything, including consistent. Because in his first season, I believe he finished sixth again. This time qualifying Depor for the UEFA Cup, but it's the season afterwards where this just comes out of nowhere, doesn't it? And this is like the first, real sign of somebody coming to challenge that top table for once, and taking the La Liga title away from the usual hotspots of Barcelona and Madrid. And the fact that he led them to their first ever La Liga title, which is absolutely massive. And he's got players like Mauro Silva in there. He'd signed Roy Mackay from Tenerife, who I think he scored like 29 goals that season. Scaloni, Slavica Jokanovic as well, which was I completely forgot that he was at Depor at this time. So, finishing ahead of Barcelona by 5 points and taking the La Liga title was just incredible. And you've not seen celebrations like this in any other part of Spain when they've won the league, really. Like I say, I would honestly say it probably rivals what the reaction of Valencia was when we spoke about them a few weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so if you recall earlier on, I mentioned on the final day of the season, 93-94, Depor had missed out on winning the title on the last day to Barcelona. So I think to an extent, there's probably an element of that mentally stayed with the club for the next few years. It sort of played on the minds and certainly on the supporters as well, which when they finally get over the line in 1999 to the 2000, there's just this release of, joy upon joy. I mean, to win it for the first time anyway as a club, but then to have got so close in the past and then win it so recently, it just makes people have an extra sense of ready to party. But it's interesting. So they went top of the league from, I think it's match day 12, and they never really sort of established a gap until later on. And there was still this, I think, again, because of the feeling that they'd missed out before, there was still this sort of feeling that it could happen again. It's well within our grasp to miss the opportunity because, like I say, they've come so far in the past. And then it gets to the back end of the season, and it's just there's no stopping it really. It's slow and steady, but it wins the race. And to do it, remarkable actually, because 69 points or so, the lowest point total to actually become champions since La Liga moved to a 3 points for a win. Also, to have lost 11 games during the season and still finish as champions, remarkable in itself. But as we all know, really, so much of what happens in Spanish football is often, I'd say, guided by what happens to Real Madrid and Barcelona. And for context, that season, Real Madrid, I think they win 16 games all season out of 38, which in itself is pretty incredible for them.
Fifth as well, didn't they? Rightly,
yeah, they did. At one point, they were as low as 17th, I think. I mean, they did have to catch up because they went away to the Club World Cup. I think they had like 3 games in hand, but they were still, I mean, this was a Madrid side that was actually being managed by John Toshak for the first part. They win the first 2 games and then go on like an 8-game winless run. Toshak gets sacked, gets replaced by Del Bosque. He comes back. And some people might turn around and go, well, okay, if you're talking about how bad Madrid were that season, are you taking away from some of the achievement that Depor have had? Well, no, it's a season where lots of teams struggled. Depor themselves struggled by losing 11 games and still managed to win the league. So in itself, it is a remarkable story. And the fact that it's their first ever one, and the fact that there's just something cool about the team and the style of play and everything like that. There is so much that goes with it that, it should be a season that isn't forgotten in a hurry,
Oh, absolutely. It's just, it's what I suppose really the only sort of like comparable between the two is like when Leicester won the league. Like I say, there were teams that were off kilter that season in the Premier League, but ultimately they led for a very long time and got the job done. And it was the same with Depor, and they did it in pretty decent style. They also had European football to contend with at this point, so they reached the quarterfinals of the UEFA Cup in their. I don't think it was their first season in the UEFA Cup. I think they'd been in it one time before, but there was no disgrace in getting beaten by Arsene Wenger's Arsenal in the quarterfinals, whilst also cantering to winning the La Liga title for the first time. So, it's a brilliant year for them, and it really is a golden age, because they don't win the La Liga title again, but they run close every year. I think finishing second the year after to Rafa Benitez's Valencia, who we've already waxed lyrical over in a previous episode, so there's no shame in that. They make their Champions League debut, and again, this is where the Champions League is starting to really, ratchet up in terms of popularity and what it means to compete in there. And they get a lot of admirers by going unbeaten in both group stages, eventually losing to Leeds United, who. Again, that famous Leeds side that reaches the Champions League semi-finals that year. But there was always a thing with Depor for me, that when we were in the Champions League, whenever they got back to Riazor, it was fair game. They could have lost 3-0 away, but they were up for it at Riazor, and it really became a fortress in the Champions League for them. And the fact that they carried on that momentum into the season after finishing second, having that famous game, against Manchester United, where they beat them twice in the group stages, and then losing out to them again in the quarterfinals of the Champions League. This is a team that, a decade ago, were sort of like just finding their feet in the Liga at the top table, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, and so I mean, I think going to Riazor and having this fearlessness about them was something that came from the energy created within the stadium. The fans. We've talked before about like the intense atmospheres at stadiums, and sometimes it can have a bit of tension at Pozo overall, a bit of just the hostility of it. Like we've spoke in the Valencia episode. We talked about the heat that sort of created it. And I think heat's the right word that comes from the atmosphere. Well, I sort of think back to Riazor as not being a stadium that had like the intense sort of heat with the fan base, but more of a positive energy that was, rather than being directed at creating a hostile atmosphere for the opposition, was actually more of an energizing atmosphere that got behind their own team, which I guess, thinking about some other clubs in Spanish football history, kind of, it makes it unique in itself that there was a slightly different. I mean, I suppose I can only really think of maybe to an extent Villarreal, and in some of their big European games, they've had more of a fan base that, rather than directing heat towards the opposing players, like you'd get, any team that goes to Seville, for example. This was a let's get behind our own team, or at least that's the way I remember it, and that could be the nostalgia goggles that I'm wearing again, but how it certainly always felt to me and feels whenever I watch clips back now.
Well, what I'll do, because I think that's a very good point, the way you talk about Riazor. I'll jump ahead before jumping back. I'll go ahead a year to when they reach the quarterfinals of the Champions League. So they'd finished third that season in La Liga. They'd finished behind Barcelona and I want to say it was Celta Vigo, but I don't think that's right. It might have been Real Madrid, but ultimately they're in the Champions League again. They go to the San Siro, and the AC Milan are the reigning champions of Europe. They've got one of the finest squads ever. You've got Shevchenko, they've got Inzaghi, Seedorf, Kaká, Nesta, Cafu, Maldini. The list goes on. It was one of the greatest teams of the noughties. They go to San Siro, they get turned over 3-0. But it's all to play for. It's that bringing it back to the Riazor, and as you said, the atmosphere that you get at Riazor isn't necessarily a ferocious one to intimidate. It's one that helps suck the ball into the goal. And in this match, I've watched the highlights back of this match recently of that game, because it was the 24th anniversary, I think it was, and the fact that they managed to overturn that deficit against the reigning champions, winning 4-0 at Riazor, was just insane, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I don't know about you as well, but when I always think back to Champions League of that period, it's felt a lot more like how the Champions League has been this season, where for the benefit of the fact that there might even be people listening to this 10 years from now, but this is the season where the away goals rule is not a factor anymore, and we've got the Swiss style group stage before the knockouts. It does feel to me like there is more goals this season, and that is how I remember European football of like certainly the early 2000s to mid 2000s, and it was teams playing without fear, but there's like always a sense of optimism of we'll just score more than the opposition. And I think Depor were a team, particularly in Europe, and obviously this game particularly, that definitely encapsulated that feeling of the time of, like you said, it is all to play for, and you keep going until the final whistle, and you just try and outscore the opposition.
Yeah, definitely. I'll just correct myself ever so slightly. It wasn't 3-0 at San Siro. It was 4-1. It was 3 goals difference. So they managed to, bag, 4 goals at Riazor. Walter Pandiani, which is always a name I like to say on this podcast. He was formidable for Depor that season. And the one player that always stands out for me as far as, my own, references to Deportivo La Coruña is Valeron. He is... we spoke about Bebeto being a legend at the club. Valeron is, a local boy who stayed forever, did really, really well with them. A great goal scoring midfielder. I think he's their B team manager at the moment. I'd have to double check that. He certainly was up until recently. But he was instrumental that night, and it was absolutely fantastic to watch. And he's one of my earliest memories of Champions League football was watching Valeron in a Deportivo La Coruña shirt, and he was just excellent. And he always was. Every game, you knew you were getting a decent performance out of him.
Yeah, legend, absolute legend. I think you might be right about the youth team set up, or has he recently left? He has been involved in the years since with the club. I'll have to double check if he's actually still there.
Yeah, because I think he was in contention to take the job recently when Depor changed their manager this season. He was touted, but I think I know they went in a different direction. I couldn't tell you who off the top of my head, but yeah, he is very well revered in A Coruña and at Depor as well, and on El Partido. So much respect to him.
That is the biggest dunk he could ask for, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. You know, if there's a trophy that he really wants, it's definitely El Partido's Player of the Year. So you know, Depor in the Champions League was one element to it. The next part, I'm going to class this as a bit of shithousery because, like I say, they've not won La Liga again. They run close, but this Copa del Rey win they did in the year before is just it. You know, like I said, it's incredible shithousery because they do really, really well to, work through the rounds and get to the Copa del Rey final. But they come up against Real Madrid, and this is the Real Madrid at the very beginning of their Galacticos era. They just signed, Luis Figo from Barcelona in, very hostile circumstances. They'd signed Zinedine Zidane from Juve. They had Roberto Carlos, Raúl leading the line. They were a force, but it was also their 100th anniversary that year, and they'd reached a Copa del Rey final. Obviously, one of the biggest trophies in Spain. The final is taking place at the Estadio Bernabeu. Their home turf, so they're thinking, great, 100th year anniversary. Florentino Perez is here to flout his, new era of superstars, and we're going to win it in front of our own fans. Wasn't the case, was it, Paul?
No, and it still causes great upset now. Like there's still Madrid fans who are very, very hurt by this. Like it's like a "how dare you" moment, I guess.
Yeah,
I'm not smiling because I like winding Real Madrid things, but it's just quite amusing, though, isn't it? That it's the sourness that still remains. That's all I'm laughing at. I'm not laughing at the expense of the club. Before anyone gets on us at social media, it is just the way that it's left. Such a huge moment for one club in the sense of an achievement for Depor. That realistically, 100th year of the club, that would have been nice for a trophy. But Madrid win trophies so often that it's actually the lingering sourness that this has left, 20 years or so later, I think is quite amusing.
Yeah, something has happened in Spain of magnitude if it gets given its own name, and the one that was offered out to this actual Copa del Rey final is known across Spain now as the Centenario, which I couldn't tell you what it means in English, but it sounds like a great name and sort of adds to that element of, yeah, they're not quite over this yet, but it was a really fantastic win for Depor. Goals from Sergio Gonzalez and Diego Tristan.
Yeah.
Again, he's a player that I could talk about all day. I watched him in a charity game last season for Malaga. He played for like the generic veterans against Malaga, and he scored a goal. And he's a big lad now, but he's still got it. And he was such a brilliant player in this era for Depor as well.
Yeah, he'd be one. We struggled doing an Argentinian 11 to find some consensus, but if we had to do like a League 11 of like the 2000s or something like that, he'd be in contention. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. And again, as you said, it's the fact that this still gets remembered, but also as well, it's the second time that Depor have lifted a trophy, lifted the Copa del Rey. 3 trophies for a club of this size in a town this size in where they're from. 3 trophies in the best part of 15 years is just brilliant. It is truly a golden era for the for the Galicians. So yeah, it's great and really fun to remember and by. But unfortunately, things don't last forever, and this is where we start to talk about the sad part, and it is the fall. And they were riding very, very high, and the house just fell from underneath them really, really quickly, and no one could ever really guess why. I think there's a lot of rumors, about whether there is mismanagement behind the scenes or whether it's like just, they've obviously managed to sell off all their superstars and not replace them with higher quality players. So it's one where, I can never really truly put a finger on why it went so wrong for them.
Yeah, so it does seem to have been a period of decline that comes from a few factors, really. There's the failure to replace the talent that leaves, but then there's the financial side to it as well. It's one that, like, it because of where Depor end up and where they, to an extent, still are, and the long road back that they are on, it feels extra sad because it's like a slow and painful demise. They obviously have a bit of early on where it kind of looks like they might hold on to status in the top tier, but it also feels like the glory days are never actually really going to come back to the Ria Thor, which we can get into how they ended up there. But for me, this is where things do get a bit dark now on this part of the episode.
It is, and you never want to talk about a team's sort of like bad bits, but I suppose we're talking about sleeping giants, and this is why they are now a sleeping giant, so to speak, because of the glories that they had. But a series of really underwhelming mid-table finishes under the new management, and there are several of them. Eventually sees them get relegated in 2011. They do bounce back immediately, only to fall back down again immediately, and then they go back up immediately. So they become the Spanish version of West Brom at this point, which is not a very not a nice compliment I can pay to a team that has been as successful as Depor there. They just lose a lot of what made them so great, and their integrity is lost at this point as well, because not only are they getting yo-yoing between the top and second division, but they're getting some absolute hammerings whilst they're doing it. There was a stat I saw where in the entire time that they were in La Liga consistently for about 18 years, they never lost to Real Madrid at Riazor. It was a fortress for them. The seasons where they start to yo-yo, they get slapped 8-2 at the Riazor by Real Madrid in a season where they just about survive in La Liga, and it shows you how far they've fallen, that they can't compete at that level anymore, and they are very, very much demised.
Yeah, demised. I think that is a very polite adjective. Good use of phrase there. Might not be a word, but we'll take it as being a word. Demised. Yeah, I like it. It's sad as well because, like, and this comes from the fact that we've talked about this successful period that they had, which is essentially 20 to 25 years ago now. You and I both know people within the Spanish football community who are fans of Depor, who were sucked in by the glory days, who I think about some of the people that I've spoken to, like Andrew Gillen, who's a lovely guy. He's a Depor fan. I spoke to him for a friend of the podcast, Spanish Segunda Show, at the start of the season for one of their episodes. And you kind of feel like there's this kind of not a contentment with like the way things are. It's kind of, or an acceptance. It's just a sort of a compromised feeling of hope that Depor can get back to Primera eventually, and when they do, there's a consolidation there, and that the worst period is now over. It's been a long journey back for them just to get to Segunda, but it's a club that feels, it's perfect for Sleeping Giant because it feels like it belongs in the top tier, from the beautiful surroundings of the stadium being on the beach effectively, to the scenes that we described earlier of the atmosphere within the ground. And there's just it still carries clout now, even when down in the well, they were still attracting big crowds. We can talk about Lucas Perez as well, and the almost fairy tale like return of him, which sadly has also not ended so great recently.
No, no.
But yeah, it just feels sad for Depor, and I think demised was a nice new word that you put in there.
It is, it is, and I think as well, for where you talk about the Dayport fans, when they thought it couldn't get any worse, and when they did drop out of professional football, because let's not forget, once you drop out of the top two tiers, you are technically into non-league in Spain. The Primera Ref system, is growing in quality and in professionalism, but it is still technically non-league. So for a club that size, who are less than 20 years ago, La Liga winners, Copa del Rey winners, Champions League semi-finalists, it was remarkable to see them down there. And they almost ended up in the fourth tier as well. I think they survived it by a point. But yeah, to where they are now, to the fact that they had this promotion last season, they won the league in Grupo Uno quite handsomely. They've managed to consolidate themselves this season. They've reached that magic 50-point mark, within 36 games. So they are surviving. There's maybe a slim hope they could maybe reach the playoffs if they go on a magic run, maybe, but I very much doubt it. But that's probably where Depor fans are quite happy being at the moment. They've got a good system. They get very good crowds at Riazor. They've got some fantastic players at the moment as well. Mario Sariano is a fantastic attacking midfielder. They've obviously got Yeremai as well, who has courted interest from across Europe. I think he was close to moving to Chelsea in the January transfer window. A 20 million euro fee was touted, but he decided to stay in Depor. And again, it shows the prospect of the project, really, to say that actually, if we carry on with this smart recruitment, this use of our cantera, the excitement that we have at Riazor, it's definitely going to be hosting World Cup football in 2030. And I can see a world where in the next 5 to 10 years, Depor will be back in La Liga and will be competing with the teams in La Liga as well. Maybe not your Real Madrids and your Barcelonas, your Atletis of the world, but the best of the rest is very much in their gift if they carry on this trajectory.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right about that. The key to doing that and reaching that for them will be having a means of just keeping things steady and not getting too carried away with it. I mean that from a fan expectation point of view, but also a club management point of view as well. Don't rush into things. Don't think, okay, the best way to go about things might be, if things results stop going your way, that you sack a manager and hope that a new one comes in and you get this bounce like some other clubs do. I think staying true to the Cantera ethos and trying to build firm foundations to protect the club's long-term future are absolutely key. So it could, we're speaking in April. I had to check my calendar then. April 2025. We could be, like you say, in a position in 5 years from now. Who knows? I would like to think that the club is very pragmatic, but also thinks things through, and that the club is able to return to the top flight, and we could at least see a full Riazor back in hosting Barcelona, Real Madrid, Atleti, with that sort of atmosphere that we saw 20 years ago, where there was the energy from the crowd, but in a, it would certainly stand out compared to like Getafe or other parts of Spain where there's energy in the crowd, but it's a hostile one. It'd be nice to have a crowd that's fully behind their own team without having to get the case of some of the others, I think. And also it's just so cool for Spain to have a stadium by the beach that's in its top flight. And I know if you think about now where we see like a La Liga TV where they've got the drone shots of the stadiums all lit up at night, imagine what it would be like. How often La Liga TV would be using the image of Rivaldo for their promotional material if it does materialise in the future.
Yeah, absolutely, and I suppose as well we could say that this is a renaissance for that Galician football as well. Because we've got Depor on their way back up. We've got Celta Vigo that are seemingly in very good hands at the moment. Knocking on the door for the next episode of your Celta maybe. But even within the region, you've got lots of clubs doing well down in the other divisions. Pontevedra have just been promoted back into Primera Ref as well, and they're a fantastic club to keep your eye out for. So it's all looking rosy up in the northwest of Spain at the moment, and Depor, could be leading the charge, and hopefully we do see them back in La Liga sooner rather than later. But that's been our first episode of Sleeping Giants, Paul, and I think we've explained that concept pretty well with possibly the biggest one so far. But we are going to have a few more of these, aren't we?
Absolutely will. There'll be a lot more for us to pick at, and I think Depor is a perfect starting point for this arc.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll say thank you to you, Paul, for once again joining me on this Thursday night to talk about lovely nostalgic football as always.
Yeah, thank you for having me again, Nick. It's always a pleasure. I will apologise to anybody who is watching it on YouTube, and for some reason it looks like we've had to do some rough cuts on the edit, or if my camera's cut in and out. But then again, I also have perfect faith in the post-production quality. So if you can't tell the difference, then just ignore everything I've said.
Yes, exactly. It looks seamless when we're done, and also enjoy your football weekend in Germany as well, which it sounds really exciting. I'm quite envious of that. As I said on El Pozo this weekend, I'll likely be installing a duck coop that my wife has decided to buy. So very different weekends we've got planned, and I hope you have a wonderful time.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I hope you get your ducks in a row.
Yes, in more ways than one. And I'll say thank you to you guys at home. It's been fantastic once again. Please do go listen to our back catalogue as well. We've got some fantastic episodes out there and more brilliant episodes to come on El Partido, yet another Spanish football podcast. But for now, I'll say gracias and hasta luego.